I don't know if I've just missed it, but Sonia walked up to children's worship together by herself. I looked, and then I looked, and I was like, how did she do that? All right. Because Sonia's little, right? So something happened. I don't know what happened, but all at once she became big. And I was kind of stunned by that. So we're talking about serving one another. We had our ministry recruitment Sunday, and I appreciate everybody that came out and signed up. I appreciate especially all the people that were served at the tables, and I wrote a thing about it in Kerry's Corner. You'll see it with the bulletin. It was kind of a little bit comical because some of the people sitting at the tables knew nothing about the area where they were because we had so many people out sick. And so I just said to them, hey, could you sit at this table? And they were like, sure. So they sat at the table. And there was material there and stuff. I just thought empty tables looked bad. So we got some people sitting there. It was a great serving. You know, it's like, are they obsessed with serving? Everybody's got to sign up for something. So I kind of thought I wanted to talk about that a little bit today. And I really thought there wasn't a better passage to look at than John chapter 13. I'm in awe of John chapter 13. You know, when you first look at it on the surface, and I have to tell you that growing up, it was standard for us to help anybody that might think of needing something, all right? If we didn't think ahead of them, we were in trouble, okay? So, you know, I think about it when my wife comes in and says, hey, do you want to help carry in some groceries? And I get it, and I go out and get them. See, that's a privilege, because when I was a child, if anybody asked me, I was already in trouble, all right? If there were groceries that needed to be carried in, I should have anticipated that and been out there getting those groceries. So if I had to be asked, I was already in trouble. If my dad walked down the street and saw the neighbor lady shoveling her drive and she was in her 70s, but you know, she was shoveling her drive, I was in trouble, because I should have been over there doing it. It was the way we were raised. We mowed people's lawns. We helped gather their apples from their tree because they were too old to do it. We had a lot of older people on our street, which I think is a blessing, but as a child I didn't particularly think it was a blessing because it gave me a lot to do, okay? And we weren't allowed to take anything for it. The only thing we were allowed to so they usually had plenty of cookies. We were overwhelmed with cookies because we always helped out. It just was standard procedure. So with first saw John chapter 13, as I should have been, because I didn't take into account the whole "He's the Lord of heaven and earth" part. And he is washing their feet, or even the thought of what it means to, because I've only washed feet a few times, I mean, besides my own. I've only washed somebody else's feet a few times, and so that was lost on me. But when I began to understand what was taking place there, it was amazing. It was amazing that they're there ready to have a meal together. And the one act of hospitality that was always done wasn't done yet. I'm sure they're all looking around and saying, well, there's no servants to do it. Think about that. There's no servants to do it. So who's the first one that thinks, I'm going to do it? The Lord of heaven and earth. He says, you know what? I'm going to wash their feet. And I'm not going to read that whole reading again, but you're familiar with it. And Jesus is washing their feet, and you can just see him moving around the table, and there's a discussion going on, and he gets to Peter, and Peter's just like overwhelmed. What are you doing? You can't wash my feet. And I love this. I love that little encounter with Peter, because he says, you can't wash my feet, Lord. He says, if I don't wash your feet, you have no part of me. He goes, then wash everything. I want it all. I'm all in, right? And then he goes on and he teaches, he makes an application. So when I was thinking about this today, I was thinking about Lubbock, Texas, and I was thinking about 1975, probably, 74. I'm not sure which move it was. We lived in a place for 4 years and moved 6 times. So we were students, and if a place became cheaper, we were forced to take it because we were always fighting for food, to buy food. So we decided to move into this place. We had a whole truck full of furniture. And as I remember it, my wife was pregnant. And sometimes after I illustrate something like that, she says, oh, no, it was then, and this was the situation. I'm sorry. My memory's not as good as hers, but as I remember it, she was pregnant. And we had this truck, and I had one of those dollies, and we had a washer, and we had a fridge, and we had a stove. Maybe we didn't have a washer, but we had a stove. We had a stove and a fridge, and all this furniture, right? And I'm by myself, and I'm not going to ask my wife to do it. So I unloaded. It's a afternoon in the summer in West Texas. It's like, it's beyond hot. You don't even think of it as hot. It's like working in an oven. And so I get the dolly, and I'm starting to push things in there, and the sweat is just running off of me. My clothes are soaked. I'm worn out and tired already. Understand, I had to load it at the other end, and I'm unloading it. There's 2 guys sitting on the porch of the house next to us. They've got an extension cord so they can have a fan blowing on them, and they're drinking a cold drink, and they're watching. And I hear the one guy go, woo, shaking his head. And I'm pushing this fridge, and the sweat's rolling down my face, and the guy yells out, whoa, it's a hot one. I didn't say anything. I managed to get everything in that truck into that house, and they did not lift one finger. They did not move away from that fan. The only time they got up was to get a new drink. They didn't even offer me a drink, okay? And I remember thinking, they didn't grow up the same way I did. Now I'm thinking, they didn't know Jesus very well. They must not have heard the story of John 13. So what's all this talk about serving? Right. What's all this talk about serving? So I want to make some points. I've got about 5 points I'd like us to look at, and they come from John chapter 13, but there are supporting passages throughout the New Testament. Service is who we are. Servants are what we are. That's what we are. All right. So. First of all, service begins with willingness. So the problem next door to me on the left side of my house when I was moving that stuff in was they were apparently not willing. All right. I can't believe they didn't see the need. All right. Or I guess they were like, well, it's not our stuff. And granted, it was a hot day, but it begins with willingness. Everyone at that table that Jesus was at could have got up and washed feet, but only one did. The first thing about serving is being willing. You got to be willing. It's not. I'm sure if I had said to those guys, I'll give you each $50 if you help me with this. $50 was more back then. All right. I'm sure they'd have come over probably and helped. That's not willingness. So, in John chapter 13. 1-4, he says, "Now before the feast of the Passover, knowing that his hour had come, of this world, having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. And during supper, the devil, having already put into the heart of Judas Iscariot, the son of Simon, to betray him, Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hand, and that it had come forth from God, and was going back to God, he got up from supper." They're all reclining and ready for supper. If I keep my hand out of the pocket, I think it'll be fine. I struggle with that, okay? He got up from supper, and he laid aside his garments, and taking a towel, he girded himself. Every one of those men was able to do that. What Jesus did not take a skill set. You know, we have a lot of talk about skill sets today, and that's not in my wheelhouse, okay? We can all get up and serve. We really can. We all have that ability, okay? There are some things, some areas of service that take special gifts. But there are some that don't take special gifts. You just have to be willing. So I'm going to use this example not to embarrass anybody, although I have been known to do that. You know that, how many of you, is there anybody here that gets a bulletin sent to them? I know we have some people that do. They're shut-ins mostly. But everybody, you come in the door, does somebody hand you a bulletin that's all folded and everything? And do you know how that gets that way? So Adam or I, usually Adam, run off the bulletin. I run off the Kerry's corners. And when we're done, we send off a little text to a man named Kevin Archibald. And when Kevin gets it, he either arranges for it, apparently, or he does it himself. He comes to the building, and he folds them, and he puts the ones in the envelopes that need to be mailed out, and he mails them out. So if you're a shut-in sitting somewhere at home, and you're getting one of those that just miraculously appears in your mail, it doesn't miraculously appear. Somebody is serving, okay? And you know why Kevin has that responsibility? Because he asked for it. Because he said, "What can I do?" And somebody gave him something to do. I'm not saying that it isn't going to do itself, but it doesn't need, you don't have to have an associate degree to do it. You don't have to have a super skill set. A lot of what we have to do here doesn't need a super skill set. But it always needs one thing: willingness. You got to be willing. If you're not willing, then it doesn't get done. So Galatians 5:13 says, "For you were called to freedom, brethren, only do not turn your freedom into an opportunity for the flesh, but through love serve one another." You know, we're big on talking about commands. This is a command. We talk about commandments. Well, are we commanded to partake of the Lord's Supper? Are we commanded to do this? We're commanded to love one another. We're commanded to serve each other through love. I'm not saying that we need to do it like a drudgery out of obligation. I'm saying that God wants us to do this. And He's made it clear. But we have to be willing. If we're not willing, it doesn't get done. And if you're willing, there's always something you can do. Now, if I'll say this later, but I'll say it a couple of times. If you don't know what to do and you want to do something, ask one of the elders. Or if we happen to have a minister of involvement, you could ask him, which we'll mention later, okay? And we'll find something for you to do. And if you don't have any in the meantime, look around. Look around, because opportunities of service are always there. Service is about seizing the moment. It's about seeing that. That's what Jesus did. He saw the moment, He took that opportunity, and He seized it. It's available. It was sitting there available to a lot of people, but they didn't do it. We went to a place to preach one time, and it was out in the country. It was, a remote area, and there was no public bathroom, and so we decided to build an outdoor one quickly with sheets of plastic and all this stuff. And we were sitting and discussing it over tea. And we had a cup of tea. There was like 5 preachers. They had a cup of tea, and they had a second cup of tea, and then they had a third cup of tea. Now we're in danger of needing to use the restroom we haven't built yet. And then we went outside, and there was a bathroom. Because one of the guys got up and went and did it. It needed to be done. In that case, there was a little bit of a skill set. He had those skills, and he had tools, and it was already done, and we were discussing how to do it the right way. But he did it, okay? Service is about seizing the moment, the opportunity that we have. In John 13, it says, "And Jesus, taking a towel, He girded Himself, and then He poured water into the basin, began to wash the disciples' feet, and to wipe them with the towel with which He was girded." Didn't need a lot of tools, a basin, some water, a towel, okay? All the stuff seems to have been there. It wasn't about ability. It was about willingness and seizing that moment, taking that opportunity to serve. We have one of those moments coming up today. We're going to eat together after lunch. You know what the great thing about eating together on the first Sunday is? That when you're done, you go home and everything's just cleaned up. Don't you love that? It's almost a miracle. I come in here to go to the office on Monday morning, and the fellowship hall's clean. It's amazing. Do you know why it's clean? Because somebody seizes the opportunity. Now, there are people that have volunteered to do it, and sometimes there's people that didn't volunteer that just do it because it needs to be done, because they see the opportunity and they grab that opportunity to do it. Galatians 6:10 says, "So then, while we have opportunity, let us do good to all people, and especially to those who are the household of the faith." It's kind of like, we tried to help everybody on our street, but help started first at home. You had to help mom, okay? You had to help around there, and then you could help other people too. And I was a child, so it really wasn't an option. It was expected. But my parents were trying to train us to be ready to serve. And they both modeled that wherever we went. We could be driving by. If somebody had been moving like I was that day and we drove by, my dad would have stopped the car, rolled up his sleeves, and we'd have helped those people until they were finished. That was just the way I was raised. But I see in John 13 that attitude of willingness and of seizing that moment. And the other thing about service is it's about everyday things. It's not about some special activity. I'm going to be all ready, we're going to have a say trunk or treat is coming up, and Adam's signing people up, okay? And we're like 2 months ahead, we're signing up. I'm going to be ready to serve. I'm going to be ready to do this. I'm going to be ready to do that. That's great. It is. It's great that you're willing to do that. But sometimes it's just about everyday things. Sometimes it's not some big event. Sometimes it's about helping out after first Sunday lunch. Sometimes it's about grabbing we've been really blessed. We haven't had an incredible amount of snow this year, all right? But when we have, a lot of times when I get there, the snow's somebody shoveled, and I'm grateful for that. Maybe there's been salt put down and stuff. That's great. Some of us go back to the day when whoever got to the building first was out there with their suit jacket shoveling snow, and somebody was salting. There wasn't necessarily a list. You were blessed to get there early enough to help, and you jumped in. You seized the moment, and it's just a simple thing. And it was done, and there was no fanfare, and we didn't get ribbons for it. We just did it because it needed to be done, and because we didn't want some little old lady coming in there to fall and hurt herself on the ice. All right? So service is about those things that we do every day. John 13:4b, and taking a towel, he girded himself. He poured water into the basin, and he began to wash the disciples' feet and to wipe them with the towel which he was girded. He just took normal things, everyday things, and did a normal, everyday activity. I told the guys I was going to do that this week. I was going to move back and forth because the camera follows me. So I just wanted to see how that will look on the video. Anyway, so the fourth point, service is for everyone. All right? Imagine we have a technology committee. We have a technology group, okay? Yeah, they're waving their arms. Thank you so much for your work, technology group, okay? We have a security group. We have different people who do different things in the body, right? Ryan is in charge of buildings and grounds, and Andy's in charge of missions, okay? We have lots of people that are doing lots of things and serving in lots of ways, okay? And so what if we had a service committee? These people serve. You stand up and you know why? Thank you. My son's going. Because we all need to serve. Because it's not a special thing. You don't get some award for it. It's just what we do as Christians. So everybody needs to be serving in some way. All right? And maybe you're not signed up. Maybe you just serve when you see the opportunity. And that's great if you take the moment when you see the opportunity to serve. Quite a few months, maybe it's been a couple years now, I was at Bennington, and I got there for a sing, and more people were coming in than they had chairs. And I remember going and getting chairs, and we're hustling back and forth with chairs, and somebody looked at me and said, "Who are you?" It's like they thought this guy just came in off the street and was taking their chairs. I said, "I was just getting chairs because there's not enough chairs for everybody." And he said, "Thank you." He was kind of stunned. I saw people moving chairs. I saw people standing. Made sense to me. The more chairs moved, the less people standing. Um, so, we all need to stop and think. I don't always do that. Sometimes I just miss that opportunity. I stand there and I don't see the opportunity. We need to be looking for those opportunities. Jesus says in John 13, "You call me teacher and Lord, and you're right, for so I am. If I then, the Lord and the teacher, washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet." So he's saying, it's not just for me. This isn't just about me. It's about all of us. And we ought to take that opportunity to help in every way that we can. In Ephesians chapter 4, he talks about the different things that God has put in the church. He says he gave some as apostles and some as prophets and some as evangelists and some as pastors and teachers for the equipping of the saints for the work of service to the building up of the body of Christ until we all attain to the unity of the faith and of the knowledge of the Son of God, to a mature man, to the measure of the stature which belongs to the fullness of Christ. The reason we have elders, the reason we had apostles, the reason we have evangelists and teachers and things is to train all of us to work. Works of service. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to grow and be better at serving in the community, in the church, wherever we are. All right? So God was aware of that, and he put people in the church to help with that, and that's what we're trying to do. And the last thing is, and we already saw it in the same passage in John 13, it sets an example for others. You ever tried to sit still and watch somebody else work when they're really overwhelmed? That's where those guys were on the porch with the fan. Woo! It's a hot one. I'm like, yeah, it is. It's awkward, isn't it? I mean, when you're sitting there and you're cool and everything's fine and you're relaxed and all this activity is buzzing around you. So it's supposed to set an example for those around us to serve. Jesus says, "I'm the Lord and Master, and I'm washing your feet." Why can't you get up and wash each other's feet? Why can't you help one another? There's so many one another. I think 35 one another passages that are distinct in the New Testament of what we're supposed to do for each other in his body, that we do those things. Okay? Service. That's what it's about. And he wants us to develop that in our life. We read that passage in John 13. He says in verse 12, "Do you know what I've done to you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you are right, for so I am. If I then, the Lord and his teacher, washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I gave you an example that you also should do as I did to you. Truly, truly, I say to you, a slave is not greater than his master, nor is one who is sent greater than the one who sent him." If Jesus could serve, then you and I ought to be able to. We ought to be looking for those opportunities to imitate him and to be like him. Peter writes in 1 Peter 2 and says, "For you have been called for this purpose, since Christ also suffered for you, leaving you an example for you to follow in his steps." So, what is all this about? Well, service is in our nature. We had an aimer here years ago, and we had a funeral coming up on a Thursday. I think it was a Thursday night or something. Thursday morning, I was here at the building with some aimers, and I said, let's clean the building so it'll be ready for the funeral. So I said to this guy, you do the men's room, one of the ladies, you do the girls' room, we'll vacuum the auditorium. I'm laying out jobs and stuff. And the guy says, I don't do toilets. I said, oh, okay. So I went and got a bucket, put some soap and water in it, went in the bathroom, started scrubbing the floor. He comes in, he says, you're cleaning the bathroom. I said, yeah, it needed to be cleaned. And he goes, I'm sorry. He says, I'm not really like a servant. And I said, oh, man, I wish you'd have told me that ahead of time, because I didn't realize that. Now I understand. You're not into serving. He said, right. I said, good. You can go ahead and go home then. We'll work here, and you just go home and pack your stuff up. And he goes, what do you mean pack my stuff up? I said, it's a servant program. And I'm not judging you for not being a servant. I'm just telling you, you don't have a place in this program if you're not able to serve. And so he said, I could learn to serve. And I said, good, grab a mop. And we cleaned the bathroom together. Right? We need to know that that's who we are. We are servants. Jesus was a servant, and if I'm going to be a follower of his, then I'm going to need to be a servant too. That's the role that God has given me. Man. It's hard to break a habit, isn't it? Matthew chapter 20, 26 to 28. It's not this way among you, but whoever wishes to become great among you shall be your servant. Notice how Jesus starts. It's not this way among you. It's supposed to be, but it's not. But whoever wishes to become great among you shall be your servant, and whoever wishes to be first among you shall be your slave. Just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life a ransom for many. Jesus came to serve, and we're his people. And we've chosen a life of following him. So we need to be servants. We need to find ways that we can serve in our community, wherever we are. In John chapter 13, verse 17, he says, if you know these things, you're blessed if you do them. So, take home. What do you take home from this? Well, sign up for something. I mean by that, I know we don't have sign-up sheets and all that stuff, but we have people in charge of areas, and we have a special announcement. We have Tim Ruff, if you stand up, Tim, and I think his wife's out with children or something, Chantel, okay? Tim is going to be our minister of involvement. And so if you don't know what to do, you go to Tim, and before the day's over, he'll have something for you. No, no, he'll try to help you and plug you in somewhere to serve. Chantel's going to be working right at his side, and they're going to work together to try to get people involved that want to be involved, that want to serve in the body here. So be on the watch for opportunities to serve around you, and pray for God to help you find a good fit. And if you want to talk to one of the elders about it, ask us about what to do. We'll just refer you to Tim. But we do appreciate so much your working with Tim, and we ask all of our deacons and ministry leaders to work with Tim and try to get people who want to be plugged into something plugged in, because we are servants. That's who we are, all right? And we need to be serving. 2 Corinthians chapter 5, he says, for the love of Christ controls us, having concluded this, that one died for all, therefore all died. And he died for all, so that they who live might no longer live for themselves, but for him who died and rose again on their behalf. So we're living for Christ now, all right? And we're living like Christ now. And we're called to serve. God wants us to serve. If you're not a Christian, Romans chapter 6 says, do you not know that all of us who have been baptized into Christ Jesus have been baptized into his death? Therefore we have been buried with him through baptism into death, so that as Christ was raised from the dead through the glory of the Father, so we too might walk in newness of life. We're called to a new life in Christ, a life as a servant, a life living for Christ. If you're not a Christian, we'd love to help you. We'd love to answer any questions you have. We'd love to help you to come to make a decision about Jesus. And if you're in the church, if you're in the body here, we urge you to find a way to be involved in the body, and we'll help you in any way that we can. Let's stand and sing.